solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I affirm.
Okay, Ms. Toomey, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Dr. Hyman Eisenstein.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about your education, your background, your training, and what do you do?
I am a licensed clinical psychologist with a subspecialty in neuropsychology and forensic neuropsychology. I graduated from Loyola University in Chicago with a double master's in counseling psychology and also education and supervision. I went on to do my PhD, my doctorate work at University of Health Sciences Chicago Medical School. I graduated in 1982. I obtained my PhD following coursework, a dissertation, that's why it's a PhD, practicum. I completed also a one-year internship at Fairfield Hills Hospital, which is a large psychiatric state hospital in Connecticut, Fairfield, Connecticut. I went on to do a postdoctoral study at Yale University, West Haven VA Medical Center on the epilepsy unit. I was hired by the hospital where I did my internship. It was Fairfield Hills Hospital. I worked there for 5 years, primarily on the forensic unit. The unit was all-male forensic unit, individuals that were deemed either incompetent or were classified as being insane, statutory, not guilty by reason of insanity, people that could not be adjudicated in court, and they stayed on the unit until they were found to be competent or could return to court. I had my license in Connecticut. I actually had my license also in Illinois, where I'm from, but I did not practice in Illinois. Moved to Florida in 1986. It's a long time ago, 40 years ago. I became the head psychologist at Sunrise Rehabilitation Hospital. That was a rehab hospital in Sunrise, Florida. I became licensed in Florida. Actually, I was licensed even before we moved. I stayed at the hospital for 1 year, and then I went into private practice. The private practice consisted of consulting at a neurology practice, working as a consultant to several different psychiatric hospitals, and of course developing my own private practice, which eventually just became my full-time occupation.
Okay. So you mentioned the word forensic. So what's the difference between a forensic, and we'll start with the psychologist, but a forensic psychologist and a psychologist? Is there a difference?
So a psychologist is somebody that is licensed by the state of Florida, completes the requirements and the ongoing education that's required by the state. The forensic aspect is an individual that deals with primarily with criminal aspects as it relates to both behavior and psychology, the interplay between the two.
The interplay between behavior and psychology is forensic psychology.
And the law.
And the law. Okay. All right. But you are a neuropsychologist, right?
Correct.
What's the difference between a neuropsychologist and a psychologist?
So my training was always in the organic brain matter. My program My graduate program was heavily based on medical, not psychological per se, but more medical related. Courses were of course, in testing, but also in neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, the understanding of the brain as how the brain functions from a cognitive or behavior, what the brain can or cannot do, versus looking at the brain in terms of the anatomy of or the pathology of the brain.
Okay, so neuro means brain?
Correct.
Okay, so then you're a neuropsychology, which you just described, and then they have neurologists, which would deal with the anatomy of the brain?
Correct.
All right, but you're not a neurologist?
No.
Okay. Have you ever been allowed to offer or give an opinion in the field of neuropsychology?
Yes.
And approximately how many times?
Well, over 40 years, probably 150 times.
Okay. Both state and federal court?
Primarily state, but it's been federal as well.
Any other jurisdictions beside Florida?
I evaluated in Texas, I evaluated in Georgia, but that was on a maybe 1 or 2 time basis, but it's basically been all in the state of Florida.
Okay. And do you have any hospital privileges?
Yes, I'm on staff at Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami Beach. I've been on staff for quite a while. I was actually on staff at several other hospitals, but they closed, so obviously not on staff there, but I've maintained my staff privileges at Mount Sinai for several decades.
And what would you need a privilege for going to a hospital or being able to, I guess, evaluate someone at a hospital? What would be the need for that?
So initially I was working on the rehab unit of the hospital, so that's why I obtained privileges. But over the years, I've maintained my privileges. On occasion, I evaluate psychiatric patients, especially those patients that I follow. So I follow them in the hospital as well. So having privileges just makes the process much more easy in terms of following my own patients.
Because if you didn't have the privilege, then you can't get into the hospital, right? I mean, you could, but you can't work, I guess, at the hospital.
Right,
Is that right?
correct.
Okay. And do you belong to any professional associations?
Belong to the American Psychological Association, the Brain Injury Foundation of Florida.
And just briefly tell us what those are, if you can.
The American Psychological Association is the association that psychology individuals are associated with. It's across the country. They set guidelines, their rules, privileges. It's basically the organization that sets the standards for psychology.
Okay. So standards that you follow as a neuropsychologist.
Correct.
And is that something that you have to renew or pay for, or how does that work?
The membership is on an ongoing basis. Correct.
Okay. And then what about the other organization?
The other organization is the brain injuries. Again, the individual that deal with individuals that unfortunately have brain injury and try to help support, educate, and have knowledge of those individuals and the challenges they face.
All right. I think you did this briefly, but can you expand on your experience in working with patients or individuals, clients, if you will?
So just one other aspect of my training, I am board certified also from the American Board of Professional Neuropsychology. So that just adds another layer in terms of my education, my experiences, and treated amongst my peers as being qualified to render opinions as a clinical neuropsychologist.
Let me stop you there, doctor. What did you have to do in addition to your education to become board certified?
The exam was a very rigorous exam. It entailed presenting a work product of neuropsychology, a report that I've issued many, many times, and another report justifying why my report and why I use certain measures, and then that was accepted by the committee. Now, it also required a certain number of hours. I believe it was 2,000 hours of work and training. But then there was a 3-hour oral examination with a committee. The committee, it consisted of 3 different areas of neuropsychology. After one was first admitted to take the exam, one aspect was neuropsychology, test measurements. The other was ethics. The third, maybe it was just general standards in psychology. But it was a broad area of testing to make sure that, again, one is qualified and one is indeed capable of performing neuropsychological examinations and evaluations at the highest level possible.
Can you explain to us, when you talked about test measurements, how that kind of is incorporated in neuropsychology? Like, why does that make a difference, and why does it matter?
So as a neuropsychologist or as a psychologist, we conduct psychological and what I refer to as neuropsychological test measurements. The measurements are based on normative data, meaning the tests are all normed based on populations across the United States. It's varied in gender, sex, education, age. So every test, it has a standard score with it. The tests are well established. They're gold standards among some of the tests. The others are more specific for brain behavior. So it's a combination of using some standardized psychological tests, some very specific neuropsychological tests, and that's what we refer to as a test battery. A battery of a variety of different measures that are all standardized. And once one, of course, is trained to administer these and to interpret them and then to render an opinion based on the totality of all the testing. The testing goes on for quite a long time. It's to try to understand an individual, their strengths, their weaknesses, their test performance. So this is how a neuropsychologist differs from a regular psychologist, but it's extra training and extra use of different measures. And of course, what's extremely important is that we just don't rely just on tests, but it's a clinical examination, it's an interview process, it's looking at the individual and understanding how they perform, how they react, and then of course, looking at collateral data, whatever there may be, to help understand the totality of the individual. So the net result is putting it all together and then rendering an opinion based on all the different aspects.
Okay. What about in the context of individuals that are facing the death penalty? Have you been involved in evaluating those individuals, those kinds of individuals in that circumstance?
So I've evaluated numerous individuals that have been both on death row as well as individuals that are facing the death penalty. I've been doing this for quite a while. The individuals, whether they would be already on death row, or the individuals that are facing the death penalty throughout the state of Florida. I meet with them, evaluate them, spend time with them face to face, try to establish a working relationship or rapport so that they feel comfortable to perform, to talk, to spend time in terms of administering the various different neuropsychological measures, but it's across the board. The battery is basically standardized, whether or not the individual will be facing the death penalty or the individual would be ready on death row, or an individual may be a totally non-criminal case, forensic case. The batteries are basically the same because we're looking at brain functioning. So brain functioning is the same across the board. It doesn't make a difference where you are and what you're doing. It's a question of how the individual is performing based on their history, based on trauma, based on events that occurred in their life, and trying to understand their level of abilities.
Okay, and were you retained by me or my office in the state of Florida versus Davion Murphy?
Correct.
And what were you tasked with doing? What did we ask you to do?
So you asked me to perform a standardized neuropsychological examination, an evaluation that would look at his overall cognitive functioning, his brain behavior functioning, how he performs, his abilities, his cognitive abilities, his emotional abilities, his functioning across the board. It also includes, obviously, looking at his background, looking at what he has been doing throughout his life, getting a better picture of the individual, looking at records, reviewing records on his behalf, whether they would be hospital records, school records, disability records. Again, whatever is available in terms of looking at to try to come up with a complete picture and understanding of the individual is basically the same across the board, but that's really what your office asked me to do.
Okay, and did you in fact meet with Davion Murphy?
Yes, I did.
Approximately, was that in person?
It was face-to-face, correct.
Face-to-face. At the jail?
At the Hillsborough Jail,
Okay, and approximately how many times did you meet with him face-to-face?
7 times.
And when you met with him those 7 times, was he cooperative?
He was always cooperative.
Okay, did he do what you asked of him to do?
He performed every task, never had any problems in terms of saying that he was tired or he didn't want to do it, or he said no. He was very cooperative.
All right. So tell us, take us through what you did. Your first meeting, how do you conduct your evaluation?
So first we want to just introduce ourselves with the individual. I think the first time actually he was on lockdown. In Hillsborough there's the general testing area where everyone, lawyers and psychologists come. That's where they bring the individual to be evaluated. The first time he was I think in the black box it's referred to.
Okay.
And they took me to another unit, and he was shackled. But even under those circumstances, he was cooperative, willing to talk. Never gave us a problem in terms of saying I'm too tired, I don't want to. He's quitting. That never happened. So throughout the 7 times, and sometimes he was in the box, and most of the time we evaluated him in the general diagnostic building, and he was brought down, and he cooperated, and he stayed as long as we needed. He never said, let's stop. If he needed to take a break, of course, gave him a break, but he was extremely cooperative.
And respectful?
He was respectful. His language was good. Never used curse words for the most part. So he was very respectful.
One of your easier clients, would you say?
Objection leading.
Overall, you can answer.
Yeah, he was definitely less challenging than some other individuals that present much more difficulty in terms of their level of cooperation.
Okay.
Now, I just may add that that level of cooperation is really important because
Objection, non-responsive.
Sustained. What's your next question?
Why is someone's cooperation in your evaluation so important?
the reason it is so important is because they are giving full effort. They're trying the best. Part of doing a neuropsychological examination is the first question one has to ask, are these results true results? What I'm going to be talking about, is this really an accurate reflection of the individual? So he tries. He wasn't trying to fake.
And is there a separate test that you administer to someone to make sure or to ensure that they're not faking?
Correct. So those tests are called validity measures or malingering measures. Part of any neuropsychological test battery includes malingering measures. We gave him several malingering measures, and he scored within the normal range. He wasn't trying to look worse. He wasn't trying to fake. He wasn't trying to play worse than he is, but he gave us a true, accurate reflection of what his abilities are. So that's why cooperation is really important. You know that you're not going to have difficulty or someone's trying to play games with you.
Sure. All right, so let's talk about some of the evaluations that, well, let me first ask you this. Out of those 7 times that you met with Davion Murphy, approximately how many hours would you approximate that to be?
It was approximately 22 hours.
Okay. And you meet with the person, you collect records that you would deem appropriate, and then do you also attempt to do what's called like collateral interviews with family members, friends, and things like that?
Correct.
And did you attempt to do at least all of those things?
So the records were, certainly there was a good amount of records, both medical records, educational records, DOC records. As far as talking and meeting with collateral sources, it was limited. Spent some time with his mother, but it was a limited conversation, and certainly perhaps other people would have been helpful to get more information, but it just didn't happen.
Judge, can we approach for a second?
Yep. Step out momentarily, not long.
All rise.
Okay, thank you. Okay, everyone have a seat. All right, Ms. Toomey, so I think your witness just, and I didn't hear it, but I think you just testified that he reviewed some DOC records, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so, what, is he gonna be relying upon those records?
Are you going to be relying upon those records, Doctor?
Right, so records that were included with the hospital records, yes, it's mentioned in my report. educational records, they were in my report. So whatever is in my report is what was relied on.
Okay, and so I guess, because it's just a little tricky, working around the term DOC records, so, that's why I'm asking if you're gonna need to refer to those records, then specifically the DOC records, we have to come up with a solution.
Well, really not. I'm not looking at jail records per se.
Right?
It's more in terms of the medical,
Okay,
in terms of the school records, anything that's related to his evaluation and understanding his academic performance or how he's been treated medically.
okay. Okay, so going forward, I would just ask that if you're referring to medical records or educational records or testing records, we just use that term as opposed to DOC
Okay.
records. Okay, does that work for you, Mr. Harmon?
That's fine, Judge. I was just, well, Dr. Warner had advised me during the evaluation this week, and the defendant was relating a great deal to her about his carcerative journey through the DOC, different CIs, different correctional institutions, treatment he received there. And I think there's an argument that goes to refute the ultimate opinion that's going to be tendered either through Dr. Eisenstein or through subsequent experts about brain damage. So,
Okay, so are you telling me you're gonna need to get into DOC records?
it just depends on where Dr. Rubino goes with his opinions, I guess, and
Okay.
where we go with this next week. So.
Cross that bridge when we get to it. So if you think it is gonna be necessary for you to get into DOC records, you just need to let me know.
Yes. Yes.
Once the defense experts are done testifying, and then we'll figure out what to do.
Yes, Your Honor. I was going to speak to counsel. That was my first avenue to see how she felt about it, because I knew Dr. Eisenstein had been provided those records. And I
Right.
think Dr. Rubino was also, if I'm not mistaken.
I think there's a confusion about the records. There's two sets of Shands records, and I guess there's a Shands in Jacksonville, there's a Shands in Gainesville, so I think there was some sort of confusion with what was
There's-
provided or.
The records we were provided, I brought the discovery pleading that I was provided. It's DOC records, Social Security records,
That was
school
amended.
records.
That's not the most recent one. That was taken off there.
Okay, Department of Children and Family Records and Edward White High School.
Yeah, now it's taken off there too.
There was a small amount of records from, I believe it's Shands, Gainesville, where the defendant was being transported there from correctional institutions for treatment for a hand injury and
Yes.
some other stuff.
Mhm.
So that was what we were provided before today, so.
Okay, all right, well, since we're just conducting, or since you're conducting just the direct examination of the doctor at this point, I would just ask, at this point, just don't refer to DOC records, okay?
Okay.
All right, very good. Okay, let's bring it back in.
Yes, Judge.
All rise. All due right, Judge.
Okay, very good. Everyone have a seat again, and Ms. Toomey, you may proceed.
All right, so let's start with some of the tests that you administered to Mr. Davion Murphy. Which one would you like to start with?
So first, the validity measures that I mentioned, I gave Mr. Murphy several different validity measures. I gave him what's called the TOM test of memory malingering. It's not a memory test, but it's a validity malingering measure, and his score was, on the third trial, was 48 out of 50. First 40 out of 50, then 48 out of 50, and 48 out of 50. So that score is within the normal limits. He's not faking, again, he's not malingering, he's not trying to look worse than he is. On the advanced clinical solution, he got 41 out of 50, 82%. It's also within the normal limits. And then reliable digit span, another test from the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale 4th edition. Again, it was indicative of good effort, average effort on his part. There's no indication that he is trying to look worse than he is. He's putting forth full effort, and the results are a valid indication of his functioning.
Well, let me ask you this. Since you've met with Davion Murphy 7 times, are these tests done in the beginning only, at the end, or every time, or something else?
So the order doesn't make a difference. There's no, obviously one needs to do or should do the validity measures before, because if the individual is not performing at his best, the results afterwards are all skewed. So one has to establish that he is giving full effort. That probably has to be in the beginning, but as far as all the other tests, really there's no order, there's no specific order. It all depends upon the equipment. You have to bring in equipment each time, how much you're bringing and what you're doing, and again, the order really doesn't make a difference.
Okay. You said equipment. What kind of equipment do you use?
So a lot of times people come to a neuropsychologist in their office, so all their equipment is there. But here you have to travel with your equipment. The equipment includes test booklets, it includes forms, it includes blocks, it includes various different items that the individual has to manipulate with their hands. It's a variety of, each test has its own set of material, but it's all something that each time you have to go through the screening device. They check out exactly what you have, make sure that it is acceptable, and then you bring it in, and there's just this, if you bring in everything at one time, I would be coming in with 2 briefcases. So this is just basically, you bring in a little each time, and then you conduct those tests, and then you move on to the next set of tests the next time one is engaged in the testing.
Okay. Let me just ask you, did you conduct, well, I guess we'll get to those evaluations in a minute, but before we do that, can we just talk about, did you gather some background information about Davion Murphy?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
So, first as far as he was born to Mrs. Serena Beeks and Mr. David Bernard Murphy Sr. on the east side of Jacksonville. He's the older son of the union with a younger brother, David Murphy Jr. Davion is the oldest of Mom's children with 4 additional younger siblings, Adam Gooden, Sierra Gooden, Kimura Wilson, and Camilla Wilson. Mr. Murphy Sr. has a daughter, Regina, who is an older sister to Davion, and Zion, who is a younger brother to him. So there's brothers and sisters on both sides. Davion itself was never married, and he has no children.
All right, and then did you, through looking at the school records that you were provided, did you come up with an educational history for Davion Murphy?
So it's a very complicated history because Mr. Murphy attended 14 different schools, approximately. Some of them were in the Dade County, in the Duval County public school system. There was testing that was completed at an early age, and then he went to several different schools, different places, repeated several grades along the way. He was in, it just goes on.
Well, let me kind of help you break it down. So when you said that he attended 14 different schools, would that mean he was also moving to different environments or different places as well?
Correct,
Was that something that you learned in those records?
correct.
All right. And then was there an evaluation, a psychoeducational evaluation that you looked at when Davion was 8 years old?
Correct.
What did that give you any insight as to his school?
So at 8 years old, he was, Dr. Serena Bloomfield did some psychological testing. He was given the WISC for children, the Wexler Adult Intelligence Scale for Children, and he obtained a full-scale IQ score of 81, 10th percentile, the low average range of intellectual functioning.
Tell us, maybe in layman's terms, what that means. What does that mean?
It's a low score. 100 is the average. 81 is at the 10th percentile. If someone scores 100 on an IQ, that means that's 50 percentile of the population. It's either better or worse. This is at the lower, in other words, 90% of the population is better, 10% is lower. Because of his low score and his low score across all academic areas, he then was entitled to be placed in a variety of different programs.
Tell us about some of those programs.
So he was eligible to be placed in exceptional student education, that's called ESE. He was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, combined type, that's ADHD, global academic delay, nonverbal learning disabilities, that's NVLD, and specific learning disabilities, that's SLD.
Okay, so let me stop you there. I want to break that down. The combined type ADHD, what does that mean?
So that means that there's both two elements. There's the attentional aspect as well as the hyperactivity. So he had problems with, there are individuals that have just one or the other, but he has both. In other words, he had problems with attention, concentration, and also excess energy and hyperactivity, inability to basically sit still and move around constantly.
Judge, can I approach real quick?
Yes?
This will be quick.
Doctor, do you happen to know, when we're talking about this full-scale IQ score that was performed or obtained on Davion when he was 8 years old, was that when he was in the 3rd or 4th grade, or do you remember?
I think he was in the 3rd grade.
Okay, and do you have a name of the school that he was going to at that time? Maybe Biltmore or?
Perhaps.
Okay. Okay, you stopped, I think, at explaining the combined type of ADHD. When you say global academic delay, What does that mean?
He had difficulty across the board. There wasn't any specific in terms of one area, but it was more global in terms of every area of academic ability. It was compromised and it was delayed.
Okay. And then nonverbal learning disability versus a specific learning disability. What is the difference and what are each?
So since there was a split between the verbal and the nonverbal, so the nonverbal was more impaired, so that's why it was a nonverbal learning disability at that time, and it was specific learning disabilities related to different areas of functioning. Again, they targeted almost every area of disability.
Okay. And was Davion also given an IEP or an individualized education program?
So he was given IEPs across the board almost every year.
And starting when? From time he was 8 on, or?
Right, 8 on. And they were relying on this IQ that was done when he was 8 or 9. And there was a recommendation that they retest him, but that never was done. So the IEP was based on this IQ that was performed when he was 8 or 9 years old, even though the recommendation was that he should be retested. And the reason he should have been retested is because the skills of an 8 or 9-year-old obviously are not as demanding as they are from somebody who is older. And as you're older, there's more demands, and the skills sets are quite different. And the IQ could have changed, and it would have been reflective.
Let me ask you that. Does someone's IQ change, or is it constant throughout their entire life, or what's the feel on that?
So IQ should be stable, but it should be stable at a point where there's a certain level of developmental maturity. So at 8 or 9, the individual is quite young, and that really is not a set determination in terms of what their IQ really should be or is.
Okay.
Once an individual is a little more mature and is a little older, so that IQ should be more or less stable.
Understood. Do you have an age that someone's IQ would more or less stabilize? Does that make sense?
So it should probably be around 16, maybe 15, 16. In other words, past puberty, where the individual already is like early adulthood. So that is probably the point where one would look at more stability in terms of IQ.
Okay. Anything else other than the 14 different schools? You mentioned the IEP program, the ESE, some diagnoses while he was in school. Anything else that you utilized in rendering your opinions that you're going to give here today?
So first, he was given the Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test numerous times. The records indicated that his score was never level 3 or higher. In grade 4, 5, 6, he repeatedly obtained level 1 in reading and writing. During high school, over multiple administrations, his scores were consistently at level 2. Now, an individual that scores level 1 is basically failing. That's not acceptable. 2 is also very low, and it should be more like 3 and above. So for the most part, he was low performance, below proficiency levels, and core academic skills with no marked improvement over time. So there was a consistent failure, and as the test was demonstrated over time, it really did not improve.
Are these the FCAT tests that kids have to pass or take every certain number of years that they're in school in order to progress and advance?
Correct. Now, because of the FCATs and because of his academic difficulties, he was diagnosed with a mental disability and he received Social Security disability. That was diagnosed early on with the attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, prescribed medications, and he was taking either Ritalin or Vyvanse as a child, and because of the diagnosis, he received Social Security disability, an indication of his difficulty in receiving the disability benefit. In addition, he had behavioral problems. There was fighting, there was being kicked out. At some point, he moved out from his home, went with a paternal grandmother. There was difficulty with smoking, gambling, fighting, and so there was a combination of both academic difficulties as well as behavioral difficulties.
And
Now-
that, when you said Davion was kicked out by his mother, would that have been in the 10th grade?
Correct.
And he went to live where? I didn't catch that.
With his paternal grandmother, Mrs. Phyllis Murphy. Now, what's also noted, when he was either the 3rd or 4th grade, he had to repeat the grade, and he received a comment in the records of EMH, of educatively mentally handicapped, which is an indication of his low IQ, his low functioning, and that was noted when he was either 3rd or 4th grade. He repeated the 4th grade, and this was something that was noted in the records probably at the age of 10, 9, 10, something in that level. He was kicked out of multiple schools due to his behavior. He was sent to Jacksonville Youth Academy Level 6 program for 9 months from age 17 to 18. Part of the program, he was forced to go to school. Then he repeated the 11th grade, which he had not completed before. Somehow his mother was able to reinstate him in public school for the 12th grade. He didn't graduate.
Let me stop. Let me just stop you there, doctor, for 1 second. I want to bring you back to just a couple of things, to highlight a couple of things. He repeated the 4th grade, you said?
Correct.
And then he also repeated with the 11th grade as well?
Correct.
Okay. With regards to medical or psychiatric history, such as any injuries to his head or what have you, can you go through those with us, please?
So there's multiple head injuries that Davion sustained. He was diagnosed again with the ADHD, and he was prescribed Ritalin, Vyvanse later on. ADHD used to be called minimal brain damage. That was what it was called back in the day. It's changed, and now it's called ADHD. The thinking was that this is a brain impairment. So I mentioned that as of note, that early on he was diagnosed with ADHD and was taking medication.
And is there a time where Davion and his younger brother were seeing a psychiatrist?
There was notes that he was seeing a psychiatrist, this Dr. Louis Quinones, every few weeks for several years. The records indicate visits from the year 2007 through 2010.
And how old is Davion as he sits here? Do you know?
He now is 28 or 29
29.
at the present time.
Yes. When do you have his birthday on there?
His birthday is January 10th, 1997.
So in 2007 through 2010, Davion and his brother, his younger brother, were seeing a psychiatrist.
Correct.
All right. And was there also, can you tell us about an incident with a golf cart when he was 7 or 8 years old?
He reported crashing a golf cart into a car wash, hitting his head on the steering wheel at 7 or 8 years old, and he remained with bad headaches after that incident.
Okay, what about at age 14?
So he was a passenger in a car that crashed into a tree. He ran away and did not seek medical treatment.
All right, then I'm going to jump to 2015. Was there a time where he had fractured a bone in his hand, in his right hand?
He fractured his third metatarsal. He was evaluated at Shands, Jacksonville, and a clamshell splint was placed.
All right, and then January 11th of 2017, anything of significance on that day?
So he was taken by fire rescue to Shands, Jacksonville after suffering a gunshot wound to the groin with rupture of the corpus cavernosum of his penis without urethral injury. So the bullet remained in his lateral thigh tissue. Surgery was performed and he was healed well.
So according to my math, my calculations, Davion would have been about 20 years old?
Correct.
And then anything of significance in February of 2017?
So February 1st of 2017 is just a few weeks after this previous trauma to the groin and to the penis from a gunshot wound. He was involved in a motor vehicle accident after a police chase, and he was taken to the emergency room at Shands, Jacksonville. Records report a Glasgow coma scale of 13 out of a possible 15.
What does that mean?
So when an individual is faced with trauma, so they are assessed on the Glasgow coma scale. The Glasgow coma scale deals with very basic orientation, motor, verbal functioning, level of awakeness. It's basically to see whether or not the individual is up and about and oriented and can follow verbal commands and motor commands. So he scored 13 out of 15, meaning that he had a altered mental state. He wasn't totally responsive. He was responsive and non-responsive, so 13 out of 15 means that there was some trauma to the brain significantly enough that he was not scoring 15 out of 15 on this Glasgow coma scale. He was given a CAT scan, a CT scan of the brain, and it showed no acute intracranial hemorrhage, mass effect, or territorial infarct. So the brain itself didn't show any broken bones.
And no bleeding in the brain, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there were no...
Objection, leading.
Sustain as deleting.
What does that mean?
So they did a basic brain scan to show no broken bones, no bleeding. But they did not do an MRI scan which could have shown there was shearing or there was tearing or any other level of brain damage that is more commonly found when more sophisticated neurodiagnostic testing like the MRI is conducted, but they did not conduct it.
Okay, and let's jump to November of 2023. Can you tell us about Mr. Davion being a passenger in a car, again involved in a motor vehicle accident?
So he was involved in a motor vehicle accident with a truck. He presented at the emergency department of Shands, Jacksonville, where he was diagnosed with dorsal which is back pain, pain in the right forearm, pain in the right elbow, pain in the left hand. He reported hitting his head very hard. What I may just add about all these different incidents, that There's what's called a synergistic effect of brain damage. There's multiple brain damages, and when there is, it's more than just cumulative. It's not just adding 1, 1, 1, each one of these separate incidents. But each one presents with more trauma to the brain, more injury, and the injuries that are, again, superimposed one upon the other are far worse than one individual separate. So it's sustaining multiple head injuries over a relatively short period of time.
Okay, so now I want to ask you, we've kind of touched on 7 years of age, 8, 12, 20, and on. Is this type of behavior consistent with a lack of a parental figure in their life,
Correct.
such as having one's father be arrested and be sent to prison for life?
That's correct. And then basically being raised by a single mom.
Objection, non-responsive.
Okay, please ask a question.
And then having to be raised by a single mother, right?
That's correct.
Did Davion ever explain or complain about anxiety or depression to you?
He said that he had anxiety, he had depression. At some point, he was taking Seroquel, which is a strong medication. It's an antipsychotic, actually, to deal with anxiety, depression. I think he's requested it at different points, but he was definitely taking it at some point.
Okay, and that's an antipsychotic, you said?
Correct.
Medication? All right, so let's talk about, before we get into the general IQ testing that you performed, can you tell us about some of the evaluations that you did? For example, the Dallas-Kaplan executive function system. What kind of test is that? What does it do? What does it tell you? What were the results?
So the Dallas-Kaplan is a test of executive function systems. It's divided into 5 separate tests. Each test has a sample section, and after the sample section, there is the test itself. There's different conditions. The test is very sensitive to overall brain impairment, cognitive impairment, and it's certainly a very good indicator in terms of one's abilities or where there's a lack of ability.
Were those the pages that we were going through?
Correct.
Which are called like raw data, I guess, if you call
Yeah,
it?
it's the raw data. The
George, if I can approach.
Yep.
About this trail making test. I know I was inquisitive about what the test was like, and you showed it to me. So, Judge, I don't think the state has any objection, but I'm going to just show Dr. Eisenstein on the screen so that we can just discuss it for the jury's information.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so I'm showing you just for a demonstrative, the trail making test. What is this? It's a box, it's got some numbers, some letters. What is the individual asked with doing?
So this is trail making test part 1.
Okay.
And this is visual scanning. Now, each one of these tests has a practice section. The practice section is to make sure that the individual understands what is asked of them when they get to the actual test itself.
Is that kind of like a control? Like in science, kind of like the control, practice, do the real thing?
Yeah, it's right. It's in order to make sure that when the test is being performed, they understand what is asked for them and they're doing it correctly to the best of their ability.
And this one, what would have been asked of Mr. Davion Murphy do?
So this is asked to just cross off the 3s. It's called visual scanning.
Okay.
And you have a pencil, and then it is not timed. Just make sure that they get it correct. And they cross off, as you can see, all the 3s on this practice section.
And how is this type of thing scored?
So it's scored basically several ways. It's timed. It's converted to a standard score. A standard score is similar to an IQ score. Each one, depending upon their performance, and I could, for example, now this score of 36 is not from the practice section. It's from the test itself, which is on the next
Okay.
pages.
Okay.
And then the standard score is 5, which equals an IQ of 75.
Okay. So I'm just going to show you one more. My understanding is these come in larger papers and you have to kind of cut them or something?
Right, so when I turned over the data, so the test itself is actually on 2 sides. So it becomes a little difficult to copy it because it's 2 sides of 2 pages. So it had to be cut and sort of put together.
And that last test, is that 36 indicated it took 36 seconds
Correct.
to,
In other words, not on the practice section, but on the actual test itself, which is
Yes.
on the following page.
okay. What about this one? Trail making test,
This is condition 2.
okay.
And the individual is asked to draw a line, connect the numbers in order. So
Okay.
as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ignoring the letters and just following the sequence of the numbers.
And what is this number, 59? What is that?
59 seconds, which equals a standard score of 2. As I mentioned, these are all normed, so one looks up in the normative manual. A 2 is actually equal to a IQ of 60, which is extremely low.
I just want to show you one more, just for an example. Condition 3,
So this is letter sequencing, condition 3, and here the individual is just asked to connect the letters in order, A, B, C, D, E.
okay, and then this.
50 seconds to complete, again, the next section, which is a standard score of 4, which is equal to a 60. Again, very low.
Right. I'll give it back to you, I'm just gonna. All right, so let's see. What about the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test? What's that?
So that is a test of receptive language. The individual is shown 4 pictures. They're told a word, and they have to pick out the picture that describes the word that is stated.
Okay, so like, give us an example.
So for example, let's say the word is ladder. So there's 4 pictures. One's a ladder, the other one may be a chair, maybe a tool, obviously not a ladder. That's one of the simpler. Tests usually progress. In general, tests are simpler at the beginning level and progress and become more difficult as it goes on. So then, of course, if they would say either A, B, C, or D, or just point, they don't even have to be verbal for this part, simply to point to the correct picture, and it's called receptive language, meaning an individual understands spoken language.
Okay. And what were your results on that test?
So he obtained a standard score of 52, which is extremely low, a percentile of 0.1, and a grade equivalent of 2.3.
Let's go to the general intellectual status examination that you performed. Did you perform that?
Yes, so I gave him the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, 4th edition, which is the gold standard of IQ.
Is there a new edition? I think it's the 5th edition.
The 5th edition recently came out.
So I guess my question for you, was the 4th edition the correct edition to administer to Davion?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so tell us how this works.
The individual is given the test. The test has several different sections. The test has been revised over time, many times, and it's improved. The quality is improved. The standardization has improved. The questions have improved to become more relevant. It goes between a nonverbal, a verbal, nonverbal, verbal. There's several different subsections. There's a point where the individual they stop if they can't get a certain number correct based on the criteria of the individual subtest. Then the scores are calculated. They convert what's called a raw score to a standard score. The standard scores then are added, and then one gets composite scores in different domains, and ultimately a full-scale IQ score.
Okay, that was a lot. Did you determine what Davion's full IQ score was based upon all what you just said?
So he obtained a full-scale IQ score of 72.
What does that mean?
So 72 is at the 3rd percentile of the general population. If one looks at the 95th confidence intervals, it goes between 68 to 77.
Okay, well, let me slow you down just a little bit, okay? I want to back up to the 3rd percentile amongst his peers. So does that mean 97% of Davion's peers did better than he did? No?
Correct.
Yes?
Correct. In other words, on a scale that has the entire population,
Yes.
so 50% are going to score at 100. And then when this is 2 standard deviations below the mean, so then we're already dealing with the very small percentage, meaning only 3% of the population. At 97% is scoring better.
All right. And that score, what does that score tell us, if anything?
So this score is in the classified in the borderline, but it's really in the with the 95th percentile, which the bands are, meaning if the test would be given over and over, so the score would fall somewhere between an IQ of 68 and an IQ of 77. But the IQ itself of 72 actually qualifies Mr. Murphy for being in the intellectually disabled range, meaning that an IQ, according to both the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and the American Board of the Developmental Disability, this score at 72, what they refer to as a score of 70 plus or minus 5. But that's a rough estimate, because this is a little more accurate in
And
terms
that
of
plus or minus 5, is that the standard error of measurement?
measurement. Correct.
Measurement? Okay.
Right. So this is the same idea. The band of 68 to 77, it's roughly 5 points plus or minus, meaning, again, tests are not 100% accurate. There's no such thing as a 100% accurate test. It doesn't exist. So there's always a band of error on any test, whether it would be a physical test or a psychological test. Again, it depends upon the examiner. I mean, I've given this test probably 1,000 times. But there's always an error measurement and how you score it. And it could be maybe there's a difference in scores. You know, there's a difference, a deviation. But 72 is a score that qualifies for a intellectual disability classification.
Okay. And based upon your profession and your experience in neuropsychology, I'm sure you're familiar with the term, the definition of what intellectual disability means legally,
Correct.
right? Do you know what the 3 elements are for that?
Yes. So the 3 elements are onset before age 18.
Okay.
IQ has to be in this range concurrent before the age of 18 and after the age of 18. And adaptive functioning has to be commensurate. One area of adaptive functioning has to be, according to the DSM, compromised. And again, that goes across a lot of different areas of adaptive functioning, but also has to be level of impairment prior to the age of 18.
Okay, before we get to why this technically doesn't equate to intellectual disability as defined by the state of Florida, what deficits in adaptive behavior, did you perform any evaluations or tests regarding Davion's adaptive behavior? And what is, well, first I should ask, what is adaptive behavior?
So adaptive functioning means skills of daily life. It goes across several different domains, different areas. It means areas of communication, executive functioning. It means the ability to perform academically. It goes a variety of different domains. Basically, an individual, how they're functioning, can they function? Can they follow directions? Can they act independently? What's their level in terms of their overall level we assess of adaptive functioning?
Okay, is that kind of like daily living, or is that something different?
No, it's absolutely daily living skills.
Okay.
And then again, it depends upon the level of severity. It could be mild, it could be moderate, it could be severe. Mild meaning that you would need some support in what they're doing. Moderate, obviously, it's worse than severe, is they're not capable of really doing any of the daily living skills independently.
So you have a spectrum from one extreme to the other, and you have individuals that are in between those two spectrums.
That's correct.
Okay. So let's talk about this manifestation during the period from conception to age 18. Were you able to determine, based upon the school records and your testing, whether or not his scores were or met that intellectual disability from conception to the age 18, and if not, why?
So, as far as adaptive functioning, clearly there was academic difficulties. Now, academic difficulties is one of the criteria of adaptive functioning. So, yes, I mean, he did have difficulty with academic functioning, and he had difficulty certainly then with adaptive functioning. There was other areas that he could have had difficulties with in terms of adaptive functioning, in terms of functioning independently. It's unclear how he performed, but as I mentioned, he did receive it was stated a categorization of the EEH, emotionally handicapped disability, so which means that there was some thought mentioned with all his other academic problems that also he would be perhaps diagnosed with ID. But the issue became in terms of when he was early on, age 8 or 9, when he received this IQ of 81. Now, the truth is that the school system itself had recommended that he should be retested. And again, an IQ at the age of...
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. It's non-responsive.
Okay, what's your next question?
What's the significance of only giving one IQ test at the age of 8 for you?
So it could be misleading. It could be not really accurate in terms of really what his true abilities were. An IQ at the age of 8 or 9 is not reflective of really what his IQ is.
Judge, I object. Asked and answered.
Okay, sustained.
All right, sir. What's the Flynn effect?
So the Flynn effect...
Flynn.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Is it Flynn or Flint? Flynn.
F-L-Y-N-N. Flynn.
Thank you, sir.
So Flynn stated that IQs over time actually have gone up, but are not reflective of really what the true IQ really should be. And it's based on a formula that is accepted by the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, as well as the manual of the American Association of Developmental Disabilities. So both those are the two manuals that basically cover what the criteria for IQ are.
And, go ahead.
And anyway, the Flynn effect basically states that from the time that the test is published until the time the test is given, there's a factor of 0.3 that is multiplied by those years and then subtracted from the IQ that was actually obtained.
And why is that?
Again, because
Objection to relevance, Judge?
Overruled, go ahead.
IQ is thought to have been higher over the population, so the Flynn is a correction factor that is entered into the IQ score. So an IQ of 72, based on the time that the test was published until the time it was given, actually drops it down 5 points to 67. So
Okay.
with the Flynn effect, his
Okay.
IQ is 67, which is more in terms of the intellectual disabled range than the 72, which is also. So both of them are, but it's just a further...
Let me stop you there for 1 second. When you're talking about that lower range, are you first talking about the applying the Flynn effect to the 81 IQ score?
So the IQ, when the IQ was given at 81,
Yes.
that test was just on the market. The Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, so it was fairly a new addition. So there wasn't too much of a Flynn effect based on this test at that point.
Okay.
Versus when I gave the weights for So there was more of a gap between the time of the administration and from the time that it was actually, the test was published.
Because now we're into the WAIS 5.
Correct. So the WAIS 5 would have less of a Flynn effect.
Okay. All right. And based upon all the records that you reviewed, all the records that you reviewed, your evaluation of Davion Murphy on those 7 separate occasions over 20 hours, do you have an opinion regarding whether Davion Murphy was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance at the time of this offense?
Yes.
What is it?
So he was under extreme mental and or emotional disturbance. As I mentioned, the IQ scores technically meet the criteria for intellectual disability. There's certainly enough indication in the records that they are. The reason why I say technically is because from a legal definition, it may miss because of some of the different testing that was conducted. However, I think in reality, he really does meet the criteria in terms of ID.
Okay.
And so that's certainly the mental aspect. Executive functioning is, as mentioned here in the trails, shows this compromise, impairment. The emotional disturbance, also the fact that he reports taking medication for both the attention deficit disorder and the anxiety and depression, receiving a disability. So again, you put it all together, and he was certainly under the extreme mental or emotional disturbance.
All right. And again, having met with Mr. Murphy, Davion Murphy, those 7 times, reviewing all the records that you've reviewed, do you have an opinion regarding whether or not Davion Murphy had the capacity to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or conform his conduct to the requirements of law? And do you believe it was substantially impaired?
So again, there was, as I mentioned, the emotional, the psychiatric, the psychological, the neuropsychological impairment, the deficits that he had in terms of impulse control, in terms of decision-making, in terms of weighing options, in terms of a difficult situation, making better decisions, better judgment, better reasoning. These are all part of executive functioning, frontal lobe activities that he demonstrated impairment, compromise. So given unfortunate circumstances, he was unable to conform his behavior, and he certainly was acted under the behavior that he didn't appreciate it and couldn't conduct his behavior to the requirements of the law.
Are there any other mental health factors in Davion Murphy's background that would mitigate against the death penalty that we have not spoken about, that you can think of?
Well, again, looking at I've conducted testing that shows the neurocognitive from a behavioral point of view. His brain has been compromised with a lot of injuries, a lot of difficulties, academic, a difficult life, meeting the criteria for intellectual disabilities, which certainly would compromise his ability. And again, looking at the structure of the brain, which I recommended, that we look not only at the outer performance, but also actually what the brain looks like in terms of the structure of the brain, which again is another example in terms of what is possibly could explain his overall behavior.
So is that why you recommended that there be PET scans and
Injection,
MRI scan?
bleeding.
Yep, sustain is to leading.
Did you recommend any other tests or anything?
So I recommended neurodiagnostic evaluations, including MRI and PET scan, to further elucidate in his brain behavior impairment that was noted in my evaluation.
Okay. Did you review any DCF records?
There was records that DCF was called on at least one occasion, maybe more.
But it was more the other records that you utilized in your evaluation and your rendering your opinions here today.
So, yeah, so those records were just indicative of, again, a dysfunctional family, abuse that occurred, neglect, abandonment. These are all different backgrounds as to person, an individual, unfortunately, 14 schools, lack of stability, lack of follow-through, lack of structure. You're opening yourself up for such vulnerabilities when that occurs. So that's what that was indicative of.
If I could just have a moment, please.
Yes.
Doctor, one last question. Do you know anything about Davion's hand dominance? Like, is he right or left-handed?
He's left-hand dominant.
Okay.
I tested for that as well.
Or past witness, and I'm.
Okay. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, jury, it's 4:30, and so we're gonna break a little bit earlier today. So we will continue at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Just remember my previous admonition, not to discuss this case with anyone, listen to any news or social media posts, no independent investigation. We're on track, so we're making good progress, okay? I promised you we'd be done by this Friday, May 15th, and we will. Okay? All right, see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.
All rise. All jurors are out there.
Okay, very good. So, Doctor, you are excused for this evening since you've not yet been cross-examined. You can't talk to anybody, including the attorneys that brought you here today, about anything related to this case, all right? And we'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Okay, very good. Thank you.
I can hand these back to the doctor.
Yes, Mr. Hernandez.
Your Honor, I have two matters. I just wanted to remind the court, I know it'll be out of place, out of turn, but Connie did indicate that my witness, Charmaine Steger, at the Duval County Jail would be available at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
All right, so I tell you what, we'll just do that first, okay? We'll do Charmaine Steiger first and then resume with the cross-examination of this witness.
And one other question, Your Honor. I haven't checked this to me, but what time should I have my doctor here? Mid-morning?
Well, Ms. Toomey?
Yes, Judge.
Who do you have left after the doctor?
I have Dr. Rubino left, and then I have 2 inmates that are going to be coming, and then I have 1 lay witness, which will be really short.
I mean, I would say, around 11:30-ish, somewhere around
11:30.
there.
And one other question, Your Honor. One of the inmates that Ms. Toomey is referring to is also related
Doctor,
to
you
my...
can take off, you're good.
Is also related to my client. If the court and the state doesn't, if the state doesn't object, I was thinking I could do on cross, simply do my presentation regarding my client, Rashad Murphy, because it basically the witness is related to both defendants and are listed by both defendants.
I don't care, other than if
Okay.
the state objects to you leading, since
I'm
it's your
sorry.
witness.
Doing it on cross,
Yeah.
Well,
you could just recall the witness out of.
Yeah. let's
I
just
can
do
recall
that.
the witness, I just didn't want him to have to be transported
Yeah,
twice.
that's fine. So whenever that witness testifies, Ms. Toomey will do direct, and then Mr. Harmon or Ms. Doherty will cross. And then next we'll just keep the witness on the stand, then you do your direct, and then same thing, okay?
And I did request those inmates to be brought over for the afternoon, if that's okay. I think I have enough. Or should I have them in?
Well, I think you can brought over in the morning. I mean,
I wasn't sure.
yeah, I mean, I don't know how long the cross is gonna last. You've got one more expert, but, no, I have them brought over in the morning.
Okay.
And Judge, I do have a concern. I know that there is a child in the courtroom, and that's fine, but there have been numerous times where we've been able to hear the baby making noise back there, and I would just ask that they remove them from the courtroom when that is gonna happen.
Yeah, so, I've also heard the child making noises. It's really, do the children have to be here? I don't know. I can't really hear what you're saying, Ms. Lau. Yeah, I understand, and that's fine for today. I know you guys were witnesses, but I just think going forward tomorrow and going forward through the rest of the trial, I mean, normally I don't allow young children into the courtroom. So, if I understand today was a necessity because you all were testifying and obviously you needed to be here, but now that you've testified, I don't know that it's necessary for the young children to be here in the courtroom. So I would just ask you please make other arrangements. Either you guys switch off maybe, one watches the kids while someone else sits in the courtroom or something to that